Today, we are going to be talking about mastering the ServiceNow upgrade, hopefully being able to help you go from perhaps if you're part of the N-1 contingency and you would like to get to an early adopter, these are going to be some of the steps you might want to take, but at the very least, trying to take the headache out of the upgrade process, trying to make sure that we can identify any common pitfalls, any obstacles that people normally see, and what we can do to really kind of beef up your upgrade game. I want to get a few things out of the way first by way of housekeeping. If you're not already familiar with Cerna solutions, I've posted on here just a few of the areas of expertise that we have on the ServiceNow platform. A lot of the reason why people work with Cerna are the reasons why you call an expert to do anything, really because you want it to still work the same way it works now as it does years from now. And part of the way we've been able to do that is through hiring the right team, hiring a group of people that have the experience to build something in the long term and not just for what you're looking to do right now, and sort of work as that expert guide through that process and make sure that the way things work now are the way you're going to want them to work years from now, so you don't have to redo that. You don't have to put in a lot of extra time and effort to fix what you did from years ago. And that really does segue well into this whole upgrade conversation. The idea that you're going to be doing something now on a more regular basis and that you have the insight to build something the right way in a way that prevents problems down the line, if that makes sense. I also wanted to point out a couple of current event pieces of news for you. ServiceNow has published a number of applications and solutions based around the recent COVID situation. And so I will go ahead and put a link in the chat right now. They did ask us to help put together a guide for their emergency outreach deployment. And we did go ahead and create something there. There's a number of other apps that they've created that I've listed here. So if you follow the link on the chat, that will bring you to our guide, as well as links to those other applications if that is of importance to you. So I wanted to make sure that we pointed that out and put that in your hands if that's useful for you. Some other points, if you have any questions during the podcast, make sure you ask them right away. You don't have to wait until the end. It's very helpful for us often to hear your questions as we're talking about the subject matter, and that will also help us steer the content for what's most useful for you. So if you're hearing something and just have some questions or want to hear it in a different way and hear it from a different angle, make sure to let us know that, and we'll be happy to try and integrate that into our conversation if possible. Another question that's usually asked, you will be emailed the recording of this event as well as the content files. However, if you want to see other episodes that we've done or just feel like checking in the near future and see what else we've done, you can go to cernasolutions.com to find other podcasts that we've done, or you can go to our YouTube channel, which is another great resource for content that we've put out, as well as our LinkedIn, which you can go ahead. Again, all of these links are in the chat right now. If you go there and follow us that way, that's a great way to keep up. But right now, I want to go ahead and introduce let's go ahead and just kind of go around the circle, say, just give me your name, what is your location, and give me a little bit of your background with ServiceNow.
Sure. Tim, I'll go first. My name's Jeff Marlowe. I am located in Chicago, Illinois. I've been working on the platform as a developer for roughly 11 years. So in those 11 years, I've worked in most of the modules, as you can expect, worked on many upgrades, so bring a lot of upgrade experience as well.
Great, Alejandra.
I am Alejandra Chiquillo. I am based out of San Antonio, Texas. And I have a little bit over 5 years experience with ServiceNow, mostly focused around ITSM and HR, but I do have experience in other applications in other areas. In Cerna Solutions specifically, I am the VA administration lead, so I get a lot of different types of requests, so a lot of different kinds of exposure. And then I also have experience with automated testing and how it relates to upgrades.
All right, great. Brett?
Awesome. My name is Brett Ishmael. I'm located in Fort Collins, Colorado. I have about 5 years of experience as a developer on the ServiceNow platform, a couple more as a customer. Before that, I've done upgrades, ongoing support, implementations for various customers of different sizes, and I've done work in mostly the ITSM suite, as well as HR, and kind of been poking around and everything for a while now. So, yeah.
Great. Yeah, and this was a great team, I think, for us to put together around this conversation. I know that many of you guys have worked on updates through the years, definitely seen kind of the ups and downs of the ServiceNow upgrade process. So I'm really excited to have this group here, and thank you guys for joining us. First thing I want to talk on a little, I don't want to drill this into the ground because I think it's a concept that most people understand, but I think it deserves some attention and a little bit of detail. Can we talk a little bit about N-1, which is right now the requirement that ServiceNow has for its customers to be either at the latest version of its product or the version just behind that. And one of the things I wanted to ask right up front is, kind of as an icebreaker, what do you guys see as how this is going to affect ServiceNow customers?
Yeah, so I think the fact, right, we're on as of this podcast, the market launch release is Orlando, right? So N-1 would require that customers be on New York. I think the forced mandate of doing that, I think, is requiring customers to upgrade on a more regular basis. I think the cadence is roughly 2 releases per year, so that means that the bare minimum clients are required to upgrade at least yearly. I think that's forcing clients to to really put their test cases together and upgrade where maybe previously they had delayed maybe a couple of releases.
Yeah, but it's beneficial, right? I mean, I think that the idea that that ServiceNow, obviously, it's so much more than it used to be.
Mhm.
It's not just for IT applications anymore. It really is across the enterprise. And so the idea that they are supporting such a large product in multiple versions, that's most likely their reasoning. But there are benefits to the customers as well, right? I mean, can you speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah, it's critical. I think where, in the 11 plus years I've personally been working on the platform, and us as a team, we've all experienced this. It started off as a very a small kind of niche product, whereas now it's a very robust platform, really. And so the features and functions of the platform are really developing at a rate that require consistent upgrades and consistent releases to really support the new functionality. So it's really essential. We've all been on releases where there are bugs and there are patches that have been introduced, but they're problems, right? The only way to have a consistent fix or implement consistent fixes is through release management, consistent release management.
Mhm. And I'll put this to the rest of the group. Why do you think customers wait? Why do you think that for the most part they don't jump on the newest version as soon as it's out?
I think depending on the size of the environment and the level of customization that they have, it can
Mhm.
be somewhat of a lengthy process. So it can be a little bit painful to upgrade for every version, or maybe even once a year if it's an upgrade that takes a client 2 months to complete. Because you also have to take into consideration the development freeze that happens during that time. So no
Mm.
new enhancements can be introduced by the development team while they're upgrading.
Yeah.
Yep. I've seen other issues like acquisitions, large projects that are underway as well. So timing can be an issue, right? You have a large project that's lasting for a while. You don't really want to enter into a code freeze mid-project. And yeah, my most recent client in acquisition is something that was making them hesitant as well, especially if you have several different ServiceNow instances that are going to be playing with one another. You know, does it make sense to wait sometimes to merge them or something along those lines before upgrading after that?
Yeah,
Sure.
and I think another big thing too, right, is customizations,
Mhm.
and I think that's when the technical debt you've incurred throughout your life throughout your ServiceNow instance is realized, especially is when upgrades occur, right? You start having to pay your dues, right? If you've customized a modular application extensively, upgrades are really where you have to vet that and work through that technical debt.
Sure.
Yep.
I think that makes sense. So that leads us to kind of, what is the process here? We work with a lot of customers who are trying to either get this done themselves or are looking to bring in a partner to help them with their upgrades, because it can require a varying amount of help. And like you guys have said a couple of times, the customization area, ServiceNow is trying to get everyone out of the box as much as possible, but I think we can all say with certainty there's not one customer who's 100% out of the box. That's just not the way that works. What about in terms of that preparation process? I think this is usually kind of an overlooked part of the upgrade. But Brett, can you kind of walk us through? Well, actually, you know what? I forgot to bring up one other point to everyone who is in the audience right now attending. We do have this guide. I wanted to bring that up before I ask this one question. Hopefully, you guys can see this now. And this is in the link, and this will be emailed to you as well. Or if you're really quick, you can go to this URL or go to our website to find this. But we have put together an expert guide for you in terms of helping you get through the upgrade a little bit more diligently. It goes, beyond some of the other documentation that you might find from ServiceNow, but this is definitely a resource for you as either as you're following along with us and have some questions this way, or want to take this back to your team. That's definitely something I wanted to make sure that everyone had access to and was made available to you. But let's talk about getting ready, the preparation process. Brett, what usually is involved in that process?
Sure thing, thanks. So several things to kind of kick it off, right? Firstly, you're probably going to want to identify who's working on the upgrade itself from a technical perspective. So maybe your developers, as well as some of your key stakeholders, people who have some skin in the game, people who know what's on the platform and what's in use. So speaking of what's in use, it's good to know what you're using. So what modules and applications do you have? So when you look at release notes from ServiceNow, that's kind of how they have it broken down as well. What module, how is it affected, what within the module is being affected. So therefore, it kind of starts to pave the way for you to tell what you need to look at, and you need to verify what you have is working the same way that you would expect it to, or some of the new features, or do you want the new features? So which of those features do you choose to include or not to include during your upgrade? So that all being said, you go to your release notes at that point, you analyze those, you start breaking it down into a development chunk that you can look at with your developers and say, what things need to be fixed and or remediated potentially before you would even kick off some test process, right? So then from there, you're basically going to go through and you're going to clone down your production environment over a sub-production environment so that you have a good test ground, something that is as close to production as possible. And then you go ahead and you upgrade that guy. You take all your notes that you've made with your release notes compared to what you're currently using, and you start chipping away at it. You go down the list and say what functionality is working. Now, whether you use specific test cases, this might be an early phase of that, but you're going to want to go through and just do baseline verification. Are these things working the way that I would think? Kind of a look, feel. And while you're doing that, your key stakeholders are going to be putting together something like a test plan, which of course is going to include things along the lines of a code freeze. So that way you're not having people developing new functionality while you're also trying to test out to verify that things are indeed working the way that they're supposed to be. So once you kind of have that laid out, that's when you start to really piece together your full-blown test plan. Is the end user going to be able to test this all the way from A to Z successfully? What does that look like? Who's involved in that? So your testing team are going to be the people that are running through that, through those test cases, and you know, or something like ATF, so automated testing framework, or in our case, Capio, which is our preferred method. That can kind of start to tell us what things we need to go remediate and or fix as a technical team. And yeah, then you kind of just rinse and repeat from there. You know, you test and you fix and you
Yeah.
go back.
Now, you mentioned before about the release notes, and
Mhm.
obviously, you know, we've in the chart that we've included here, it has a link to the Orlando checklist, which we've also mentioned. And that's the #1 check item, is make sure that you've gone through the release notes. How big of a process is that? What's usually entailed there?
Good question. So that can take varying amounts of effort, right? If you, the more advanced your client is, that the more applications they use, that kind of grows in scope pretty quickly, especially if they have a lot of complex integrations or customizations. As Jeff said earlier, you're inheriting technical debt. So that really comes into play then. So obviously, as a rule, the less you're touching, the less time it's probably going to take to fully test. Um, so basically you're going to go through, as I was saying before, module by module, and you're going to compare the release notes against your current functionality to see what differences there are, things to look for, understand, and to be able to fully vet and test. And for me, it helps to do that so I can start to break it down section by section, which also corresponds to your key stakeholders, hopefully, to be able to understand what needs to be updated and or fixed before you even get to the point of your tests.
Now, looking at the teams that you sort of touched on near the beginning in terms of how to put this team together, I think for the most part this is pretty cut and dry, right? I think that you know who's going to be on your technical team, you know who's going to be on your project management. Generally, the managers and owners are going to be part of the stakeholders. How do you determine who to put onto your testing team?
In my experience, the key stakeholders will probably know. You're most of the time going to be going with your subject matter experts or people that are currently working in the system who really know. And as we're all working in this, we start to get a feel and we understand who these people are. If it's incident management, well, you're probably going to have some sort of team lead who fields a lot of the incidents or knows how it works on a deeper level. And I think it's important to stress the difference as well between a customer who actively uses this tool versus a developer who builds in it. A developer kind of has confirmation bias in a way. When they start to develop fixes or things, they know what they expect, they know how it should be used. So they're, in a way, when they test it, they're looking for that, which is why you need people who are in the tool actually using it as an end user might be using it to be part of your testing team. That's why that's separated out there, and it should be tested from both angles really. But fundamentally, the customer, it's going to be in their hands. So you're going to want to have the SMEs and the people that are used to seeing it every single day. So as well as people who can go through and approve requests without needing to call on somebody else to say, hey, can you kick this off for me? Can you nudge it along? Type of thing. So people that have responsibility for the product, people who know about it, and the people who can go through and test it fully end to end, clicking all the buttons.
Essentially, not
Making
the
sure.
developers is what you're saying. Like
Yeah.
the boots on the ground, people that need to this application to work the way you want to see it work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. What I mean, so to the rest of the group, I mean, how long does this process, the planning process, usually take? Because it's my understanding that this is probably the easiest, well, one of the two of the easiest parts of this process to overlook. So how long
Yeah.
should people be investing into that time-wise?
So the planning itself can take it's iterative, right? So if we're doing as ServiceNow recommends, typically 2 releases a year, you generally can figure out the planning or flush out the planning over time, right? But it can take anywhere from a week or two to months. But calling back to Brett's point about release notes, right? Reviewing the release notes, that's something that needs to be done on a regular basis, right? As developers, it is our obligation to stay on top of new features, bug fixes, patches, things like that, so that when it comes to market launch for Orlando, we're familiar with some of the preceding fixes and release notes, so that it's not drinking through a fire hose type scenario. But in my experience, yeah, it can be anywhere from a few weeks to months to plan, but it depends on the complexity of the environment greatly.
And we've mentioned that not everyone really can be an early adopter, right? It really does depend on the maturity of your ServiceNow practice. But and we've also mentioned how I think it's pretty common knowledge that it's a good idea to wait until maybe a patch or two before you actually start to consider the upgrade, which that's all part of the guide that we added in here as well. But when is the right time to start planning? Do you plan as soon as the release notes come out, or do you plan after the patches start to come through? When on their timeline should they begin this process?
As early as possible, usually. You can always adjust on the fly. You're going to need to adjust on the fly as more releases come out, really. Some patches come out, you're going to need to look at and evaluate those to decide. So for instance, if you're saying, okay, New York patch 2 is what I was going to go to, or Orlando patch 1, by the time you're implementing it, chances are there's going to be another patch out that might actually address a major issue that you were running into. So you need to be vigilant and make sure that you're keeping an eye on those notes and those patches specifically, because those ServiceNow techs, they're creating problem cases and they're resolving a lot of these issues for you. And you can actually work with them through High to help you with these types of things as well. So it is really vitally important to plan as early as possible and to stay on your feet and be willing to adjust quickly as well to help resolve any potential issues that you'll run into during your upgrade process.
I think the only thing that's rough with that answer is when we tell people as soon as possible, the idea is that no one's going to do it as soon as possible, right? I think that it's just this good habit that people should do that kind of gets swept under the rug. And so really, if you are starting to see yourself get panicked during the planning phase, definitely it's worth considering starting that process earlier than you're currently doing it, and maybe developing the right team to put in there. But something else I wanted to touch on, I think that probably the second pitfall that people run into with the update process is they don't quite consider how long the testing process is going to be, or what's going to be involved with testing, how much planning goes into just the test process. And we hear a lot of the time that people who work in the testing department say, look, we're the last team to be congratulated for a release going well, and we're the first team to get scolded for a release going poorly. So I kind of wanted to throw that out right now. I mean, when I'll talk to Alejandra about this. What do you think is the reason why testing is so often overlooked or
I think part of it is that people have a different definition of testing. Like a developer, with the example that was given earlier, between just developers and like a business user, the way we test is wildly different. And I think that could have something to do with it. So maybe as developers, we're assuming that a stakeholder is going to test out all of their processes and that they know what those are. But that might not be the case, or they might run into issues that are actually enhancements and not related to the upgrade. So it can get a little bit blurred with testing.
Mhm.
So I think it's important to have a test plan and like have all those details laid out um, at the beginning.
Yeah, well, and I want to kind of jump back a little bit. Sorry for the clunkiness with the visual, but I mean, the testing team is really the largest team that you need to be working with, and it's probably has the most variety, but also the least definition in terms of what's going to work best for a company. But when it comes to testing, I mean, talk a little bit more about, what are some of the processes that the customers should be doing in terms of planning out, um, you know, planning out the way testing should be carried through during this process?
I think identifying your key stakeholders is very important, um, and making sure that they understand the area that they're responsible for. Oftentimes, I've seen they usually delegate testing to other users that are very familiar with the processes. Like I think Brett mentioned earlier, the ones that are in the platform that are, actually going through these processes on a daily basis. Um, so yeah, it's definitely an important step.
So why don't we do this? Now, I think that something that's worth pointing out here is the difference between automated testing and manual testing, right? I think that for a lot of customers, specifically ServiceNow customers, automated testing is something that has taken a back seat. I think it's something that's becoming more and more common in the business world and the business IT world, but it's still not something that has really full adoption from ServiceNow customers right now. And so they have their tool. They have, the ATF automated test framework. We also have a tool called Capio that we had actually developed. We were one of the first automated testing solutions on the market for ServiceNow. What is that? I guess one question I have is what do you think the obstacle is for customers? And this is to the whole group, for customers in terms of making their upgrade process easier using the automated testing tools available to them.
I think, and anyone else can add to this as well, but I think part of it is that a lot of customers don't think about testing until there is something to test, like an upgrade, for example. So taking the time to develop all of these test plans and all of these test scripts in preparation for the upgrade can kind of seem overwhelming or
Mhm.
too time consuming. So I could see customers shying away from it in that perspective, and then they could probably have the good intention of revisiting it, for a future upgrade, but it probably gets put on the back burner and doesn't get revisited until, the next upgrade,
Right.
at which point it's probably too late to develop all those test cases.
So you
Yeah, I
mean
couldn't agree more.
if the regular testing effort is, we'll say, A, and the effort to implement automated testing is A plus B, they don't want to go through with A plus B, even though it means they're only going to need to do, B or smaller every single additional time. Okay, that makes sense.
Yep.
Well,
Yeah. I think
sorry.
it can be a little bit difficult to see the long term, especially if you're just trying to stay compliant, if you're just trying to get that upgrade done before you're, out of compliance, so you don't lose ServiceNow support or something like that. I could see them kind of, putting it on the back burner and just holding off until the next upgrade, if they're like on a time constraint.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, resource allocation is a big deal there, I think, right? Because they're looking at it and they're saying, well, if I'm going to use this person for X number of hours already, then why don't I just have them test it? And
Mhm.
it is, again, looking forward to understand that you're going to be saving that later. But it's hard when you're just trying to, on a spreadsheet, say, how can I justify A plus B, as you said earlier? Um, so I think there's that, as well as potential technical limitations as well. ATF can be a little confusing at first, especially if you're not very technical. Um, it on top of testing your upgrade, now you're looking at learning something new too. So I think
Mhm.
there's a little bit of fear there for people. to embrace something new that you don't necessarily know that it's a guaranteed result to save you time. I would argue that, statistically it is, and that people benefit from it across the board. But I think those two challenges are almost too much for most people to take on, at least right now, until it gets simpler.
Sure. Why don't we do this? I think it might be helpful for anyone out there that maybe has not implemented automated testing yet to get a kind of a firsthand visual of what that looks like. Alejandra, would it be okay if I make you the presenter right now?
Yeah, of course. Okay, so let me just share my screen here. Can you all see my screen okay?
Sure can.
Okay, cool. So earlier we touched on the importance of test plans. It's definitely true for manual testing where you have a document to kind of outline what that test process looks like, all the different roles and details about what's being tested. So that Capio is pretty similar in that sense, in that it starts with the test plan. So your first step in Capio to creating your test scripts is to create a plan. And this is usually broken down by the application that you're testing. So you'll have a plan for incident, a plan for change, a plan for problem. Like you can see in my example here, I have the incident plan. And then the next level to that hierarchy is your suites, which is basically your different processes for each plan. So in my example here for incident, I have a basic incident process, I have a first call resolution, and then I have a child to parent incident process. So I'm going to go ahead and click into the basic incident. So as I mentioned, suite is your second level of the hierarchy, and then cases are your third and final level. So these are the more detailed records within your automated testing, which is basically your steps of what's being tested, yeah, and all, your steps for that process. So I'm going to go ahead and execute this and then come back to it.
I want to interject real quickly. This might seem kind of technical. I know that usually this type of event draws in both technical and non-technical users, and there is going to be an element to this that we're going to highlight for some of the less technical people in terms of how this directly applies to the work that they do as well. So I just didn't mean to derail you there, but I wanted to bring that up real quick, just as a heads up to the attendees.
Yeah, definitely. So one of the really cool things about Capio is it's, there's different tools to accommodate different technical levels. So you can have a developer go in here and know the ins and outs and create scripts just off of scripting and experience. Or you can have a business analyst go in here and use one of our UI tools to create some of the testing according to the process that they're familiar with. So yeah, and I believe we might walk through that a bit later if time allows.
Yeah, we have time for that. Can you, so based on what we're seeing here, with the automated testing process, so the idea here is that you're still building the test. You're still basically doing the manual. The very first time you do this, you're still going through the manual process of creating a test, right?
Right.
But what you're doing is you're doing it in an automated way. What about in terms of, I'm trying to think about this. Well, I guess, what are the differences for customers in terms of, what kind of changes do they generally see, or what kind of time savings do they see in this process?
So it's really cool because Capio can cut down your time to test by a lot. So in a recent client experience, we had a client that was, it took them like roughly 200 hours to test a process. So, or not a process, excuse me, to test their ServiceNow instance for an upgrade. So they had 5 people doing testing for a week, full time. And with Capio, after, they had all their test scripts built out and everything, they were able to reduce this to just a couple of hours.
And that's
so
a big difference, right? That's
yeah.
not necessarily, you know, the way that a result that every single company is going to see. I think we've seen some companies, you know, turn 40 hours into an hour, or some companies turn 200, like you said. It really can vary, but it sounds like at the very least, it's usually a pretty drastic change. What do you think? I mean, well, before I get into that, why don't you, can you actually walk us through the process of creating a plan and kind of showing that off a little bit? And this is
Yeah.
really where I wanted to make that note that for the non-technical crowd, this is actually going to be sort of a non-developer's path for doing this. So if you're able to do that, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, of course. And then just to add a little bit more to the value add and the time saving that you get, it also makes retesting things a lot less painful, or a lot less of a, you know, time consuming task. So when you have defects fixed for an upgrade, it's as easy as just executing that suite or executing that process to test it, versus having to, you know, have someone manually test it. And this is also true for patches. So it makes testing patches, you know, pretty easy to do and not time consuming at all. Okay, so what I'm showing here is the list view of plans. And you can see we have a button up here available to us called Test Designer. So I'm going to go ahead and click into that. And this is our Capio robot here. And he is loading up the UI. So this is the UI that Tim, you'd mentioned, that makes it easier for any technical, you know, any users of any technical level to go in here and create these test plans. So I'll go ahead and just, to be consistent with my example, I'll create an incident plan. You do have two different types of testing. You have acceptance and system testing, otherwise known as unit testing. I'm going to do acceptance, which is the end-to-end process testing for the purpose of this test designer demo. Unit testing is also available, and it's very handy, and it's for testing your configurations. So here you can see you get a screen to fill out your environment. If it's not already available in the system, you can create it along with the test account. I'm going to go ahead and pick an environment that's already been created with my test admin. And then you can select the browser that you want your automated test to be executed on. I prefer Chrome, but they do have Firefox and IE. And then just as a quick note, you do get a navigation on the right that basically just walks you through what you can expect out of the test designer. So we're about to complete step 2. And triggers and notifications. Another wonderful thing about Capio is that you can set it up to run on its own on a schedule, which is very useful if you have a planned upgrade and you want it to run, you know, say 3 or 4 hours once your upgrade's completed. So I'm setting this one for daily at 8. Okay, and then the suite setup is really neat because you can select a reference record. You know, say you're testing your parent-child incident process and you have a record that you want to base your test scripts off of, you can select that here. So I'm just selecting this demo incident, and then some additional configurations. I prefer the screenshot. It's a very, very handy tool to use for troubleshooting, or for whenever you have a failed case. This is basically provides you a screenshot of where the failure happened. So you can see whether it's like a hidden field or maybe a tab that didn't get selected. Okay, so this is your review of the test designer, and I'm going to go ahead and select create here. Okay, so this created my incident plan according to what I selected, and it created the suite, named it after the incident that was selected, but you can definitely rename your suite here. From here, you can use Case Creator to create your cases. So this is another really handy tool in Capio that basically creates some, you know, some pre-configured script for you so that you can use it as a base for your test cases. So you can see here with the Case Creator, I have 4 cases that were created. You can definitely rename these. according to each step in the process, but you can see here we have some script created for us based just on that test record. So this really empowers, you know, users or business users that don't have a lot of technical experience. It really empowers them to create a lot of the test scripts without needing help from a developer. So
Yeah, so essentially it looks like you were able to create both a plan, a suite, and 4 test cases really just through navigating ServiceNow at a configuration level.
Mhm.
And it was just based on the existing script that already existed within the ServiceNow or any other customizations or changes that were already in there. What about in terms of you know, we've mentioned it already, it's worth pointing out, what is the difference between for ATF, you know, when you're using ATF for an upgrade, what are some of the differences that people should expect there?
So ATF is different in that it's more like GUI based. So it's like more based on UI versus like the actual scripts that you see in the cases.
Mhm.
ATF is tricky though, because if you're upgrading your environment and, you know, say you have like 5 incident processes that fail when you run your ATF scripts, it's a little bit difficult to tell whether the failures are related to changes in the process caused by the upgrade or changes to ATF caused by the upgrade. So that can be one of the challenges
Yeah,
with
so
using
in other words, so like ATF is part of the system that's being upgraded. And so when you're running the tests and changes are being made to it, it's hard to tell, like you said, where those are coming from.
right.
Something that I thought was that I know a lot of our customers are really interested in with Capio is the idea that not only do you not need to be a developer to create those cases or create a whole plan like you just did, you don't have to know best practices for testing, because that's already kind of baked into the solution there.
Hmm.
So that's exciting. I know this is something that you know, we wanted to point out just as far as how automated testing applies to someone going through a ServiceNow upgrade. There's obviously a lot more to Capio, and if anyone has questions about Capio or wants us to fill in some more information or send something over to you, obviously feel free to put that out in the questions, or you know, reach out to us directly there. So yeah, I think that's great. Anything else that you guys want to add, Jeff or Brett, specific to Capio? Or automated testing in general, what people need to know?
Well, I think it might be important to point out what Capio does kind of versus ATF, right? I think we kind of talked about this before a little bit, but Capio is basically like you have a robot that's going through and doing exactly these steps. And it's able to do so because Capio is hosted on a server on a separate server, instead of whereas ATF is built into the system and is more like a possibility if
Simulation.
this was done. Yeah, if this was done here, what would happen? Versus Capio is saying this is being done here. So give me the output of what happens when we run that. And I think that's an important distinction, kind of to your point earlier, Tim, on the differences between maybe a potential pitfall of something like ATF versus Capio, and why it makes sense to use something like Capio. It's a like for
Yeah.
like, not a if this was happening. It is happening, and here's the output.
Right. Yeah. What you're saying is because ATF is built on ServiceNow, and I want to specify that ATF is a very useful tool. That it absolutely does serve its purpose, and there are a lot of use cases where it's a great way to get some of the automated testing done. But when it comes to other use cases that a lot of our customers have come to us for, the reason why they're looking for something more, there are a variety of reasons. One of them is that it is running on the system itself. Using a system to test itself usually means like you said, it's basically pretending what if this happened and then giving you the result. Whereas Capio is built on Selenium and it's hosted on an external server, so it literally runs those tests on the browser. That's what you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
And then along with that, just to highlight another important difference is Capio is equipped with so many tools to empower the users. So not only do you get, the test designer and case creator and Capio recorder that help, users from all levels, give them the ability to be able to create these test cases and test plans. You also have Capio Mini as a, troubleshooting and debugging tool, which is incredibly helpful because it opens up an a browser that's like controlled by automation, and you can troubleshoot any, anything that you run into that's upgrade related with Capio Mini, and you don't have to necessarily run an entire test plan or test suite. So it's just very neat, very neat tool to use for troubleshooting some of those issues.
Yeah, awesome. So, I mean, kind of bringing this back to the upgrade process then, I mean, how often do you see an upgrade release go poorly? I mean, just in your own experience, what are the types of things that when it goes poorly due to poor testing, what are the sort of problems that most customers see?
Yeah, I guess probably more often than not, I see. I think upgrading, maybe not the outcome, the eventual outcome, but I think testing is a big hurdle and triaging defects. So defining test cases, identifying testers is a challenge we identified early on, right? Knowing who to assign to a team of testers, knowing how to write test cases, knowing what test cases to write. But also, making sure that when test cases are being executed, that it's clear what in fact is related to the upgrade, what was broken as a result versus what was never understood to be working, right? So if I'm testing a process that if I'm a tester, I'm an assigned resource, I was assigned to test change management that I didn't fully understand, I'm much more likely to not appropriately test that and test all the edge cases and test all the scenarios and identify something that may not in fact be a break, may never have worked in the first place. So a lot of time is spent in spinning, chasing potential bugs that don't benefit the client. And that's where writing appropriate test cases and reusing test cases where possible is really, really effective. So you have more time to remediate the real bugs and less time chasing down fake bugs.
Yeah.
And I think that ties into something like knowledge as well, right? Like if somebody's not aware that functionality might change because of an upgrade or something is operating differently, it's important to be able to capture that somewhere so that they can go as a reference point and tell that something is actually operating as it's supposed to as well. That's been a pitfall that I've seen people run into, is that they don't understand maybe the UI changes. For instance, have a client that we have to go list out and say, hey, here's every single UI action or button that you click, it might operate differently. So we have to go through and verify that these things are working correctly. I think between automated testing and manual testing, these can help kind of track those things. But at some point, the customer, whoever's using it, is going to have to be able to go somewhere and be able to tell how it's supposed to work. So I think that's also an important part, document everything as much as you can, I guess is the takeaway.
I think that's also going to fall into that ASAP hole, right? It's like, document everything is sort of that good hygiene that it's the best practices that that everyone knows, but maybe not everyone does. And I think that's where, having something, some form of automated testing is definitely going to mitigate that for the customer. But guys, we're actually a little over time right now. I do want to leave this open if anyone has any additional questions. I want to throw those at us, but we were getting a few questions throughout that I think we covered all of them during the conversation. But if we didn't, feel free to reach out to me and let me know what we can answer for you guys. If you have any questions, you can always go to cernasolutions.com and submit an email to us that way. Follow us on LinkedIn. Find me on LinkedIn. My name is Tim Lee, L-E-I-G-H. If you want to send me a direct message with any questions, I'm happy to help in any way possible. And to the panel, thank you guys so much for lending us your time and your expertise, Jeff, Alejandra, and Brett. Always, it's a pleasure. And everyone stay safe and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Stay safe.